Chapter 6 The False Prince. Connor lectured us about Carthia for nearly an entire ride to whenever we were going that morning. He faced backwards in the wagon seat with Mott, drove, and Cregan did the vigil duty from the rear. He pointed out the various towns all over Carthia, gesturing their direction from us and describing in detail the qualities of the different large cities. Gilead is that way, he said, pointing to the south, the capital of Carthia and home of the royal family. Have any of you ever been there? Tobias spoke up. My father brought me there when I was very young, but I don't remember it. I've been there too, but it was some time ago, I added. Tried to steal a pigeon from the king's dovecote. It didn't work out so well. They laughed, which was odd since I hadn't meant it as a joke. I'd been hungry at the time and was barely escaped without being detected. Sprained my ankle in a fall and I ran. And as I ran, that didn't heal for a week. I'd been to many of the towns he spoke of. It was clear that I was better traveled than either Roden or Tobias. Roden said he'd been born somewhere in southern Carthia and left at the steps of the orphanage in Benton. He had no idea who his parents were or anything about them. He never left Benton until Connor came for him. Tobias said that he had been born in a town near Galvin's, but his mother died at birth and his father died of a disease a few years later. His grandmother had taken over his care afterwards, but after she died 2 years ago, he'd been sent to the orphanage. Who educated you? Connor asked him. My grandmother. She worked for a man who had a vast library and let her borrow a different book each week to read to me. I miss the books almost as much as I miss her. Do you read? Connor asked Roden, who shook his head. I've always wanted to, though, Roden said. I'm good on my feet and thought maybe I'd join the king's army, but to rise in rank, I'd be expected to read. So a patriot, Connor said admiringly. Then we shall have to teach you to read. What about you, Sage? Can you read? I shrugged. Didn't you already ask me that? You chose to insult me the last time rather than answer, Connor said. I don't expect you've been much educated. My father said a person can be educated and still be stupid, and a wise man can have no education at all. Your father was a worthless musician, Connor said. It sounds to me like he was both stupid and without education. And Mrs. Turdbeldy told me your mother was a barmaid. I hate to think of the education she might have given you. I stared at my hands resting on my knees. If you can give me anything worth reading, I'll make my way through it. Who amongst you rides a horse? In a gentleman's style. Again, none of us answered. I'd ridden a horse several times before, but in all my recent experiences, it was usually stolen and always in an attempt to escape the horse's owner. That probably wasn't a gentleman's style. I hardly dare ask whether any of you have been taught your manners and other social graces. I have a little, Tobias said. Roden actually laughed at Connor's question, though he quickly corrected himself. Master Connor, make me into a gentleman. I'll learn. You'll learn. You will all learn, Connor said, and at the end of the next 2 weeks I intend to make each of you into a gentleman, so flawless in your learning you could pass as a noble before the king himself. We're going to see the king? I asked. Connor shook his head. I didn't say that. Only that you would stand in front of him and make him believe you are a noble. Roden looked over at me and smiled. I didn't share his enthusiasm. 2 weeks ago, I asked, what's the hurry? Connor locked eyes with me, because that's when the boy I chose will be tested. Tobias cleared his throat and then asked, what happens to the other two boys, the two boys who you don't choose? Connor looked at each other, one of us, before answering. When we spoke, we only said, 2 weeks, boys. Pray you are the one I choose. Then he turned his back to us and he continued riding. Tobias, Roden, and I looked at one another. Cregan read the unspoken conversation and chuckled. Roden seemed a little more pale again. Tobias lost any expression on his face whatsoever, as if he turned to stone. Undoubtedly, we were all remembering how casually Connor had ordered Latamar's death, and then had quickly justified it based on the higher moral status of his plan. He would choose his winner in 2 weeks, and most likely the other two boys would follow Latimer's fate at the same time.